Namaskar viewers, hello and welcome to Sansad TV. I'm Teena Jha, you're watching Perspective. In what marks a strong start to the financial year, India's overall exports rose by 6% year-on-year in the first quarter of FY26, reaching $210.31 billion. This compares to $198 billion recorded in the same quarter last year. As per the Commerce Ministry, it's the highest ever first quarter export figure. What's even more significant is that the growth comes despite global trade uncertainties, including disruptions around the Strait of Hormuz. The ministry said both mercantile and services exports registered growth in the April to June 2025 period. And if the current trend sustains, India could surpass last year's overall export performance. And that's not all. The trade deficit also narrowed sharply in June 2025, falling to $3.51 billion from $7.30 billion a year earlier. The trade deficit declined 9.41% year-on-year, pointing to a more balanced and resilient trade outlook. So what is driving the momentum? Despite some sectors having slowed down, what's fueling the optimism around India's export story? We'll discuss this and much more in Perspective today. Joining us are two distinguished guests. So let me first introduce them to you. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome on the program today Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, former Ambassador, WTO. Dr. Dasgupta, glad to have you with us on the telecast. Welcome to the program. I'm also delighted to welcome Dr. S.P. Sharma, Chief Economist, New Economist. Dr. Sharma, always a pleasure to welcome you on my program. Let me, in fact, begin the program today with you. Try and understand what are the key factors which are driving this growth in exports. So the numbers suggest India has posted record exports in the first quarter despite global disruptions. What do you see as the key drivers behind this strong performance?
Yes, Teena Ji, the key drivers are India's increased resilience and India's increased competitiveness in the global market. During the last 4 or 5 years, we have observed a great growth trajectory of Indian economy. In the GDP numbers, like we grew 9.7%, thereafter more than 7%, and the average growth rate during the last 4 financial years is 7.5%. And in the same line, the exports are making new highs every year in the post-COVID years. Starting from 21-22, we posted a number of $677 billion. And thereafter in 22-23, again $778 billion, thereafter $780 billion. And last year we posted a great number of $828 billion. So we are making new highs every year with increased resilience of Indian products and with increased resilience of our reforms in the global headwinds. And during the last 3 months, though these 3 months were impacted by many headwinds from the global economy, like the Trump tariffs and many geopolitical developments, worsening geopolitical developments. But despite those developments, we are in an increased number of exports trajectory. As you rightly mentioned, that now we have a $210 billion exports during the last April to June period. Again, good growth despite many headwinds. And merchandise exports are also posting the good number, $112 billion, as compared with the $110 billion during the same period last year. And the services exports are always growing in a much higher trajectory. $98 billion is higher than the $88 billion posted during the last April to June period. And our trade deficit, that is very important at this juncture, because India is a growing economy, significantly growing economy, and as our demand is always intact. Despite this demand and despite global headwinds, our trade deficit is decelerated from $22 billion during the last year, April to June, and now $20 billion during the current year, April to June period. So all developments, like starting from the reforms for the manufacturers, from the PLI scheme, now these reforms are becoming visible as we are becoming more and more competitive in the global marketplace, supported by the ease of doing business, particularly for the MSMEs also.
Okay, let me come back to you for a sectoral analysis in the second round. Let me bring in Dr. Jayant Dasgupta for his perspective first. Dr. Dasgupta, it's been highlighted by the ministry that the Q1 export growth is the highest ever first quarter export figure, and we've touched this record high figure despite global headwinds, including the current tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. From a trade diplomacy standpoint, sir, what does this signal about India's global competitiveness?
In terms of the merchandise exports, I think they have held their own. Instead, in place of $110 billion in the quarter last year, it has gone up by $2 billion only. So it is a marginal increase, you can say. But this is despite the Trump tariff threat hanging over trade. It is despite the tensions in the Middle East, which really speaking, I think, came into larger focus about 2 months ago. But and the issue with Pakistan, which we faced in end April and early May. So despite these, we have shown an increase of $2 billion. So that is quite, I think, significant. But what is the highlight of this quarter is the galloping services exports. And we are no longer a one-trick pony in the sense that apart from IT and ITES, like communications and telecom services, financial services, other business services, etc. So this is something which is very, very welcome and very, very heartening. And there are some trade pundits who have forecast that services exports may actually touch or surpass merchandise exports in 2 years' time. Because merchandise exports are roughly about $440 billion and services exports about $370, $380 billion. So that is something which is very, very heartening.
You know, the numbers of the first quarter, Dr. Dasgupta, are heartening. It brings about good news and it signals a strong start to this financial year. But do you see the current global tensions, the disruptions, the tariff wars having a prolonged impact on India's export sector? Because we want to sustain this growth, perhaps we want to touch further high numbers. But if this continues, how do we navigate these headwinds?
The first point I wanted to mention is that our main competitors like China, Vietnam, the ASEAN countries, they have all been slapped with tariffs between 25% and 40%. Of course, for China, it is, I think, 51 point something, which has been calculated. Though the details are very fuzzy, they have not come out. So, even Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, which compete with India in terms of apparel exports, they have been slapped with much higher duties. I think 25% for Bangladesh and or 35%, something like that. Now, the problem is that Vietnam has been slapped with 20%. We are still negotiating. If our tariffs come down to 10 and remain there, then we will have an advantage. Indonesia has already got 19% tariffs overall from President Trump's statement. So if we, are also face 20% tariffs, then we will be on a par with Indonesia, Vietnam, and a few other countries. So then there would be headwinds because overall, I think with these tariffs, there would be a constriction of imports into the US, specifically speaking about the US. And the EU market is not really growing very much. It is in a state of relative, slumber, you can say.
Right.
The other point is that the Chinese are going to diversify their exports in terms of both their destinations and the value addition that they achieve in countries in the ASEAN region mainly. So that will be a kind of a threat also on the import front. Already we see that the DG, the Director General of Safeguards and anti-dumping, they have started investigations on 14 products. And quite a few of them are from China. So it is a kind of a mixed bag. If we get 10% come 1st of August and the others remain at 19, 20, 25 and up to 40, and China remains at 55 or 51, then we will stand to gain. But having said that, I think it needs also to be mentioned that the SBI has said that there are a few sectors, petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, apparel, etc., where India stands to gain hugely. Now, in all these areas, capacity constraint in the short term may come in the way of our achieving double-digit growth or high growth. So, for instance, apparel, we have stagnated at about $17 billion overall globally for the past few years. And Bangladesh is touching $40 billion. Vietnam is about $33 billion. Turkey has also surpassed us. We are the fifth now.
Right.
And China, of course, is above $100 billion. So it is not going to be easy to add to the capacity by the flick of a switch and start exporting because Bangladesh is going to be slapped with higher duties, or Sri Lanka, or Cambodia also. Cambodia is now facing a lot of closures of the apparel units, which have been basically set up with Chinese assistance and also owned by the Chinese.
Right.
So there would be opportunities, but the time span is going to be short. Whether we exploit it to our advantage or not remains to be seen.
Certainly. How well are we positioned to capture these new opportunities is something that we'll further discuss, and especially in a rapidly changing global trade environment, it's very, very difficult to stay competitive. But that is one aspect. I'll come to you, Dr. Sharma, in just a bit. But coming back to these numbers, and I'm curious to ask you this, because when we look at the export growth numbers, we want to attribute it to several factors. So how much, given your experience, you're an economist, how would you break it down? How much of it would you attribute to structural reforms, say government policies in the last few years, versus the global market dynamics, something that we've touched upon just now?
Yes, Teena Jha, because we have a lot of reforms during the last 4 or 5 years, particularly during the Corona period. And thereafter, our economy, our resilience increased significantly. As I mentioned earlier, that our GDP, our exports are making good numbers year after year. But there is another reason also, as we have signed free trade agreements with many economies, many promising economies like Australia, UAE. These economies are doing great in the export numbers. As I was going through some numbers with Australia, UAE, and even the BRICS countries. We are doing significantly higher as compared with many economies. Like in Australia, our exports were at around $6-7 billion. Total trade was $12 billion only in 21-22. Now it has been increased to $24 billion. And the BRICS countries also, our trade was $113 billion. Now it is at around $226 billion. So we are doubling our trade trajectory with the new trade partners like Australia, UAE, and now UK. We have great opportunities going forward to increase the trade trajectory to the double level in the 5-6 years, as anticipated in the signing of the free trade agreement, that our trade is expected to be doubled in the next 5-6 years, or maximum 7-8 years. So the reforms supported by the ease of doing business and the reforms such as PLI, these are supporting the export numbers and the GDP numbers, and the products. Like, we are also becoming competitive in the product market. Like in the first quarter, April to June, now our electronics products are growing significantly in the global market. Our growth of exports in electronics is estimated at 46%. That is very high export in the electronic segment. And again, the other traditional items like tea exports grew at 39%, and Jute also grew more than 20%, and the other products like cereals and the marine products grow more than 10%. So all the products are also becoming more and more competitive in the global market with the reforms at the domestic place. And in the coming times, I believe the ease of doing reforms are continue, and the government is very, very focused to increase the trajectory of exports in the coming times, as we have a target of $2 trillion by 2030. As Mr. Dasgupta rightly mentioned, that services exports will exceed the merchandise exports in the next 2-3 years. That is true, that the government is already anticipating that the exports of services and the merchandise will be equal by 2030, as they have target of $1 trillion in services and $1 trillion in merchandise. So our target is expected to be reached by 2030 with the reforms, with the new trade agreements, as we are signing the bilateral trade deal with the US also. That will be, I believe, significantly favorable for India, as Mr. Dasgupta also mentioned. And we are also in the process to sign the free trade agreement with EU. That is, I believe, on the cards. So in the coming times, such kind of free trade agreements, which are very, very promising, and with the growing economies, will make India more and more resilient in the coming times, and our trajectory of exports is expected to become more and more strong in the coming times.
So what will it take for India to reach the 1 trillion export target by the end of this decade is something that I'll come back to you and ask you specifically in the concluding round. But a related question, since you mentioned the schemes, and especially schemes like the PLI, the Export Promotion Councils, and the FTAs, let me get in a view from Dr. Jayant Dasgupta. So do you believe that schemes like the PLI, the FTAs, the Export Promotion Councils, are they having the desired impact on India's export competitiveness? And a related question, something that Dr. Sharma touched upon, with FTAs now being negotiated with multiple partners, some of them have already been agreed upon, but some of them are still in the works. How critical is their timely conclusion for sustaining this growth momentum in India's exports?
India can't remain isolated in a very rapidly changing scenario, and it must seize every opportunity of expanding its trade. So I think FTAs are a stepping stone, but they are not the be-all and end-all, because as we have seen in the case of some of our FTAs, including the ASEAN, we haven't been able to get our act together. So we haven't really gained as much as the ASEAN have gained. Their gains are about approximately 4 times more than us in terms of the value, the difference. So the FTAs also need to be viewed in perspective. They provide us with an opportunity, especially to move on and to exploit third country markets, apart from the FTA partner countries, if there is a certain complementarity. But the FTAs also have their downside. For instance, with one of the partners, we have seen unusually heavy gold imports coming into the country. And with a little bit of dash of platinum, it was being mentioned that it was platinum exports which was coming in, but it was actually gold. So all kinds of things happen with these FTAs, so they have to be very tightly monitored. That is point one. Point two is that the export promotion schemes like the PLI scheme, it has proved very significant in at least 2 areas. One of them, notably, is the mobile phone market, where Apple has expanded its manufacturing and assembly operations in India tremendously through its suppliers. And Samsung, which is also a very large producer of mobile phones in the world, they are also in the process of doing so. So that is a success story. In electronics, there are other success stories also. But by and large, barring these 2 areas, the PLI scheme has not really shown the kind of results which were promised 3-4 years ago. So we need to tweak the schemes. We need to perhaps introduce something new to obviate the problems that the earlier PLI scheme or the current one has faced in respect of the other sectors. There are 14 sectors, of which 2 or 3 have made significant progress. The others have not taken off as well. So that is the second. The third one is the most important one, and that is that if we want to reach $1 trillion in exports of merchandise goods, it will call for a huge amount of investment. And where is that investment going to come from? And that is very closely intertwined with the idea of ease of doing business. Right. If we have high power rates, for instance, the average power rate is about 5.5 rupees, 6 rupees. Whereas in competing countries, it's much less. In China, I think it is in the region of 3 rupees or so. And the kind of delays which take place for merchandise goods exports, especially at the ports, railways, transportation, at the customs level, things have improved a lot in the last decade or so, but they still are not on a par with China or Vietnam or many of our competitors.
Certainly,
which
and
adds to the cost.
Yes. And especially if we are to achieve the ambitious targets that we have set for ourselves. Dr. Sharma, I'll come back to the point that I mentioned. So if we are eyeing a $1 trillion export target by the end of the decade, we just have about 5 years or so. What will it take for us to get there? Policy support, industry transformation, or trade diversification? Or can we say a mix of all of these, and that too in such a short span of time? How will it happen?
Yes, I would say a mix of all these things, and particularly the focus on the MSME exports. In the 100 products, I was going through some numbers that the most demanded products in the global economy. And we are also participating in those products. And there are more than $4,000 billion exports every year of those products. And our participation is only $250 billion. We are less than 5% of those total 100 products, which are $4 trillion right now. So if we are able to build our capacities, particularly the MSMEs capacities, and we are linking them significantly with the global market, then the target of $1 trillion in the merchandise is achievable. And I am confident that this services exports will become 1 trillion by 2030. And the support is required for these merchandise exports that is now very, very crucial at this juncture to move forward, to support them with the reforms like the cost of reduction in the raw materials and the compliance cost. All these costs must be reduced to make them more and more competitive in the global market and to achieve the targets of 1 trillion in merchandise and 1 trillion in the services exports. Actually, we have to build our capacities. We are producing those products. We are also exporting those products, but we don't have that kind of volumes to export much in the global market. So increased capacities will support to achieve the magic numbers of $2 trillion by 2030.
Okay, to wrap up the show, Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, what in your view should be some of the key focus areas, especially for the policy makers now, to ensure that this is not just a good quarter, but a consistent trend, which will perhaps take us closer to the ambitious targets that we've discussed?
I think the first issue which needs to be addressed on a continuing basis, no country can rest on its laurels and say that we have done all the reforms that were required and now we need not do anything more. So it is a continuing process. We need to do a lot of things on the ease of doing business front. That is one thing. The second thing is the transaction costs and the manufacturing costs, including the electricity costs, the labor hiring charges, and the labor code, for instance. It has come up against some resistance from some of the states. So these are some of the things which are, and land acquisition, getting approvals for electricity connection, for water connection, for environmental clearance, etc. All these things take time, which cost money. and which deters foreign investors from coming and investing in India. If you look at the figures of Vietnam, for instance, you'll see that they have consistently outshone India in terms of investment, attracting investment. So we need to take a cue from other countries, not necessarily only China, and then follow suit, reform, and reform. That is one thing which we need to do. Two, we need to have FTAs, which need to be examined very thoroughly from the point of view of mutual benefits, because it can't be a one-way street. So that is the second thing. And third, we need to develop our own science and technology inputs into our manufacturing processes and export-oriented industries. For instance, pharmaceuticals, it's a huge area, and we are still very highly dependent on the active pharmaceutical ingredients imports from China. So these are some of the things which come to mind readily.
Certainly. So a lot of change has happened, reforms have taken place over time, but these need to be consistent. So perhaps we need to scale up these reforms. The FTAs that Dr. Jayant Dasgupta said should be mutually beneficial. And lastly, we must develop our own science and technology, something that we've heard our Prime Minister often say, but the momentum has still not picked up. So let's hope that the policymakers put more focus on these areas if we are to achieve the short-term goals that we have set by the end of the decade and the long-term goal of becoming a Viksit Bharat by 2047. So with that, we'll have to wrap up the program. Thank you once again to both my guests for joining me on the program today, sharing your thoughts with us and our viewers. To you viewers, thank you very much.